AIDS. The first thing that comes to mind when one hears this word is death and suffering. When AIDS first came on the scene in the late 70s, it was recognized as GRIDS, or gay-related immune deficiency disease, that infected mostly white males. Now this disease has mysteriously reached African Americans and people of African descent around the world. There are many theories as to the origins of this disease. With that being said, let's take a look at how statistically this pandemic has ravaged the African world. Out of the top 10 countries with the highest count of people living with AIDS, 8 of them are African countries, and America, ranking 10th, has about 1.1 million people living with AIDS. Almost half are African American. In 2007, African Americans accounted for 51% of the new AIDS HIV cases. The rate of AIDS diagnosis for black adults and adolescents were 10 times the rate for whites and nearly 3 times the rate for Hispanics. If African Americans were singled out as an independent country, they will rank in the top 20 when it comes to people living with AIDS HIV. These mind-blowing statistics are said to be caused by sexual promiscuity and unprotected sex. With such high rates in teen pregnancy and abortions in the African American community, one cannot argue with the latter. Sexual promiscuity, however, is a facet in American culture that has an impact on all racial groups. What I find interesting is how the virus seems to just pop up in specific areas of the world on specific groups of people. The AIDS virus was said to first develop in sub-Saharan Africa, then it somehow surfaced in New York and San Francisco, specifically in the gay community. So how can this sexually transmitted disease travel from sub-Saharan Africa to New York and San Francisco? We were told that the virus originated in non-human primates in sub-Saharan Africa during the late 19th and early 20th century. However, this theory was challenged by Dr. Robert Strecker, who claims that there are no genetic markers in the AIDS virus typical to that of the primate, and the AIDS virus cannot thrive in the monkey. Dr. Strecker then goes on to say that the AIDS virus can and apparently does thrive in the cow, having essentially identical characteristics with the bovine virus, and this further gives a hint of the role vaccinations have played in either accidentally or purposefully inducing the AIDS epidemic. Strecker also makes allegations that the World Health Organization began experimenting with a lymphotrophic virus that was produced in cows but could also infect humans. So, why would the World Health Organization begin to do this type of research? In 1969, the United States Department of Defense secured money from Congress to perform studies on immune system destroying agents for germ warfare. This took place in the Department of Defense Appropriations hearing for 1970 on the development of immune system destroying agents for biological warfare. Strecker believes that the World Health Organization experiments on lymphotrophic virus was funded by the Department of Defense. This makes sense due to the fact that by 1968, the World Health Organization was solely in control of the world's experimental biologicals for almost 2 decades and set the standard for the development, manufacture, distribution, and administration of essentially all pharmaceuticals throughout the world. Leonard Horowitz, in his book Emerging Viruses, presents his research on how he discovered that there were claims that the United States Department of Defense requested and got $10 million to make the AIDS virus in labs as a political ethnic weapon to be used mainly against blacks. His sources also state that the World Health Organization started to inject AIDS-laced smallpox vaccines into over 100 million Africans in 1977 and over 2,000 white male homosexuals in 1978, this time with the hepatitis B vaccine through the Center for Disease Control, New York Blood Center. Interestingly enough, it was in 1977 that the World Health Organization launched a major campaign against smallpox in urban populations of Africa. Ironically, this is where the AIDS virus will appear in large numbers, not in the rural areas where the green monkey has more contact with humans. Now one may raise the question, why did the Department of Defense feel the need to target people of African descent from around the world? To answer this question, we will have to go back to the 1960s, the year in which the Appropriations Bill was passed. The 1960s was a decade of black empowerment. African Americans began to challenge established norms of their identity and their role as citizens of this country. This will manifest itself in organizations like the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, the Nation of Islam, and the Black Panther Party, where great men like Huey P. Newton, Malcolm X, and Dr. Martin Luther King were able to articulate the struggles of being black in America. Also, during the 60s, the African independence movement was in full swing as militia organizations like the Marxist African Party for the Independence of Guinea and Cape Verde and the Marxist-Leninist Liberation Front of Mozambique took up arms to fight for independence. This posed a serious threat to America and their capitalist agenda. National Security Memorandum 46 was designed to prevent social upheavals which could radically change the political situation throughout that area. This memorandum was sent to the Secretary of State, the Secretary of Defense, and the Director of Central Intelligence. COINTELPRO was another organization designed to prevent the coalition of black militant groups and prevent the rise of a black messiah who could unify and electrify the black militants. These objectives were carried out by the FBI and led by J. Edgar Hoover. Those memorandums were designed to maintain a safe nation free of communism, and since America was involved in the Cold War with Russia, they felt that it was essential to eradicate these organizations due to the fact that the black American and the African movements agreed with concepts or was affiliated with communism. Another problem for American foreign policy was the growing population of the third world nations. Men like Henry Kissinger felt that the rapidly growing population of the third world nations will only be problematic in a globalizing world, since these third world nations were devastated with poverty. Together with the sharp deterioration of the global food situation in 1972 and 1973, serious concerns were also raised about the ability of the world to feed itself adequately over the next quarter century and beyond. Henry Kissinger articulated these concerns in the National Security Study Memorandum 200. I question Henry Kissinger's concerns about the ability of the world to feed itself due to the fact that the United States is only 5% of the world's population, but intakes more food than any other country on the planet. Shouldn't there be some type of memorandum designed for the equal distribution of food and resources before we construct plans to control the population of a people?
What's the U.S. policy? Do the U.S. have a policy on population control? And this is where our story gets really, really strange. Because this may be the most notorious document in the history of the United States. And I'll show you why. It's the National Security Study Memorandum 200. Kissinger report, who was the director of the NSC and Secretary of State, submitted this document to Nixon in '74. They identified target nations they were going to use. They wanted to list multinational organizations. Legalize abortion was key. Financial incentives, propaganda, and even coercion were going to be used. The methods of NSSM, they wanted it to be inexpensive and safe. They wanted it to be perceived as safe, for sure. Non-physician, which means they wanted to implement this to huge populations and not enough doctors to do it. And vaccines are perfect for that. You don't have to be a physician in these countries to vaccinate. But this thing just jumped off the page. Injectable contraceptives for women which are effective for 3 months or more. Didn't exist back then.